This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carilion.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carilion, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Gary Simonds. Dr. Simonds is a neurosurgeon who has treated tens of thousands of patients with devastating illnesses. He's a professor at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine and the Virginia Tech School of Neuroscience. He has published 3 nonfiction books on burnout and psychological distress in healthcare providers, and routinely writes about and gives talks on neuroscience, neurosurgery, medical socioeconomics, medical humanism, medical ethics, and burnout. He joins me today to talk about his debut novel, Death's Pale Flag. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Dr. Simonds.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply honored.
I'm deeply honored to have you here, man, with all of your credentials. But tell me, as we begin, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, I suppose you can always say it started when I was a young child and I was inspired by a burning bush. But I don't know. There was no inflection point for our profession. You know, you have to write a lot. Often it's very dry stuff, but you're always writing stuff about the patients and in the charts and all that sort of thing. And then you're writing papers for scientific oriented stuff and all. And so it's part of your day in many ways. And then I got into the world of burnout, really for the last 15 years have been studying that and working on it and writing about it. But it was really only when I retired from clinical neurosurgery, which I did a few years ago for a number of reasons, but a little earlier than I anticipated. So I guess I had a lot of energy left, and I wanted to tell certain stories, and I wanted to see how it came out in fiction. It's a whole different world from writing the nonfiction stuff.
Sure. What was your interest in burnout? Did you experience burnout yourself, or what prompted you to start investigating that?
Yeah, I think I love to pin it on everybody else, and truth of the matter was I had reached a point with my team. I was the boss. I was the chief of neurosurgery, and I had a whole bunch of neurosurgeons and PAs and residents under me, and I had reached a point where I couldn't stand them because everybody was kind of acting out. They were acting like kind of these classic TV holier than thou surgeons, and we're really just a bunch of pricks. And I of course, I believed I was well above it all, but I know I wasn't. And I had reached a point. We were getting so many complaints about us that I was like, I'm going to either have to fire everybody or figure out what we're doing wrong. And that's when the concept of burnout kind of came to me through a number of ways. And I began to realize that we were all burning out. We were all burning out from the world that we inhabited, and that perhaps if we tackled the burnout aspect of this, that things might go smoother. And it was truly amazing. Once we took it on, our team went from, I was getting 20, 30 complaints about my team every month. And it went to 0, and the team eventually was getting accolades all over the hospital. So it really was an impressive turnaround.
What are the key signs of burnout? I promise we are going to talk about your latest book, but I'm just curious, like in that environment, what are some core signs that, someone's burning out?
Yeah, and to be honest, the novel deals with burnout as well, but the classic definitions of burnout involve an emotional exhaustion and a nihilism and a going numb. And there are these assays that you can take and it will tell you if you're burnt out or not. But the reality is, I think it's much more a spectrum than it is this all or nothing deal. I think we all are in this society and in this kind of high energy, high demand, everything's buzzing, multitasking society that we're in. I think we're all burning out to one degree or another. And so it shows up in many ways. And I think it shows up different in different people, because I think it tends to accentuate some of our personality defects, some of our personality shortcomings. So in our world, it really was kind of manifesting itself as this seething, this anger that was going on all the time, where people would snap immediately at the simplest of questions and not engage with people and not really look to get to know and become friendly with your coworkers and that sort of thing. So it can certainly manifest in many ways, but the classic sense is that you're just running out of energy to deal with the normal hassles of every day.
Well, let's talk about Death's Pale Flag. What can you share with the audience about this novel?
Well, I'm hoping it will be a bit of a thrill ride. I think there are multiple things that might interest people. I know that there's a lot of interest in my world, in the world of brain surgery and neurosurgery. And there's been some very nice nonfiction books about it. I don't think there's a lot of fiction taking place in the neurosurgical world, but I wanted to really open the doors and let people see as honestly as I could what it was like, what we were capable of, what we weren't, what the actual operations were like, how people got to that state and all. And I began thinking that doing it through fiction might be much more immersive. I like to say it. I was hoping to put the reader in the operating room with the high-speed cranial drill in their hands, and they're the ones opening it up and taking a look inside. So on one level, that's certainly what I would like the readers to get out of it. And then certainly the burnout themes are there, and I want people to kind of get a sense of how people respond to high stress and how we all can burn out. I wanted people to also see the grace is the word that most often comes to me, the grace and the bravery of the patients that are involved, patients and their families that are facing the very worst days of their lives. It's been nothing but an inspiration throughout my life, throughout my working life, to see their responses. I often think if I were in the same situation, I'd be running around the room screaming and throwing things and breaking things, and just it's the exact opposite. They are brave, they're tough, they're full of grace and gratitude. It really is inspirational. So I wanted a little bit of that to come through. And then I wanted a little thrills and chills. And so there's a ghost element. Our main protagonist is a neurosurgeon, and he begins to see ghosts, and he begins to experience them in an escalating fashion. And the question is, could they be real, or is he losing it? And that's what we play with.
Yes. Well, I'm sure we don't want to give that away, but was that ghost element, inspired by some like real life event for you, or is that a common thing that might happen? Some kind of ghostly sightings?
Well, don't you see my friend here sitting next to me? No, no. It's interesting. I personally have, as far as I know, have not experienced anything like that. Maybe a couple of times in my fraternity basement back in my college days, but I grew up in a family. My mother and my grandmother lived in the house, and they're both Scottish. They're off the boat Scots. And they profoundly believed in the supernatural, and both had many stories of their interactions with ghosts. And, when you go to Britain, it's like everywhere you move, there's supposed to be a haunting and a ghost somewhere. But so that was just part of my soul. I mean, that was built into me. So I've loved ghost stories. I continue to seek them out on Netflix and all that sort of thing. So it was easy with me to play with this genre, and I was hoping that something like a ghost story would kind of help propel people through the medical side of the book, because there's a lot of medical components to the book. But I thought it would keep a steady beat of thrills and chills, although I also wanted the readers to think about, well, what really is more scary in this book? Is it the supernatural, or is it the very natural world of what we're facing in the operating rooms and ICUs and stuff?
Yeah. How did you find going from having written a lot of nonfiction in your life? I mean, not just the books, but of course, all the writing you've done throughout your career. Going from that to writing fiction, was it a challenge to write fiction for you?
I would bet that it was a challenge to write good fiction. It was no challenge at all to put stuff on the page. So I guess the jury is out on that one of how much of a challenge it really proved to be. I found that I called it like verbal dysentery. The minute I opened up those doors, it just came pouring out, and I ended up with like 260,000 words. And
wow.
I was saying, well, I know I'm not Stephen King, so nobody's gonna want to try to read this book. So I really cut it down, and of course I rewrote the heck out of it. So I'm hoping that it's reasonable, but it was more fun than it was challenging. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And it, when you're writing for medicine and I don't know, biomedical stuff, you have very, very tight constraints. And then all of a sudden, there's no navigational beacons. I could go anywhere I wanted with it. And originally in those 260,000 words, there were all sorts of things that were there. There was a witch, there was a pro football player that they're gone, but yeah, I went all over the place.
Did you have a team, around you helping you shape the development of the novel? Like after you did your first draft, did you have editors that you were working with, or an agent that was really helping you and say, hey, look, this is all good, but we got to go from 200 something thousand words down to, I don't know, maybe 80 or 90?
Yes. And yes, I guess I first of all, nobody got a hold of the 260,000 word book. But I did send it out to a couple of what do you call it? Now I'm going to block on the name of the editors, kind of a content editor as opposed to, the copywriting or whatever part of it. Because I'd never done it before. And the whole fictional side is really new to me. And they had some amazing, really good suggestions and ways to contain, I guess, how I was like a wild horse romping through the meadows and how to pen it in a little bit more. And then I have several close friends and my wife and family who I subjected them to some of the early iterations, and they were very helpful. So yeah, absolutely. A lot of people took a swipe at it good and early.
How was, sort of getting that feedback? Was it tough to hear, or were you like open to it? And because I know that, especially with a first novel, some authors tell me, is really resistant to what they had to say, but it sounds like you were pretty open to it.
Yeah, I guess I had no real pretenses of being a fiction writer. And so I think I was probably less sensitive to it. Like if I I do give a lot of medical talks and a lot of, I give it to non-medical people as well, but I give a lot of talks, and, you always get these surveys done about it. And it would really bother me if 2 out of 100 people said that, I sucked. And it would really bother me, but that was my business. I felt very comfortable doing it. Writing fiction is not my business, or was not. And so I think I was probably more open, than maybe some people. It didn't hurt per se. And it really felt helpful. I mean, it felt like people were truly trying to point me in the right direction. And I guess, how can you not take that as something as positive?
The name of your novel is really interesting to me, Death's Pale Flag. How did you come up with the name? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I'm a bit of a Shakespeare nut. I kind of read Shakespeare for fun. And Shakespeare criticism, even probably more than Shakespeare anymore. But that stuff is always on my bedside table. And it's a quote from Romeo and Juliet. And it's when Romeo finds Juliet, presuming she's dead, and he's remarking on the fact that she hasn't even lost the blush of life in her cheeks, that she must be so freshly dead that she hasn't gone pale with death. And, we've certainly seen that transition in real life. So it very much stuck with me and has a real meaning to me.
All goes back to Shakespeare, Billy Shakespeare.
Always.
Well, anything else you'd like the readers to know about this book before I move on to some other questions I have for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and I think readers will pick up on a lot of different themes. And what I really want to do is engage people. And I mean, engage people. I mean, have discussions with people. I want people to think about some of the stuff they read in the book and contact me. And I'm delighted to talk to people one-on-one. I'm delighted to talk to reading groups. I'm delighted to talk to, bigger groups about any of the themes in the book. We touch on a lot of themes, like I said, certainly burnout and the grace of the patients. But I'm also I love that the conflict, if you will, and maybe conflict's the wrong word, but there's a strain between the scientific world and the spiritual world. And I'm very interested in that. Would love to hear people's feelings and thoughts about that. And just a whole lot of other themes that hopefully I tapped into, and I'm just inviting people to talk to me.
Well, I mean, you've seen, obviously you lived in the scientific world. You've literally had people's lives, in your hands. I'm curious, what is your take on the link between the scientific world and the spiritual world? Are they natural adversaries, or can they live in harmony somehow?
I think my response is to the latter. Yes, they should and could. I think we set up an artificial antithesis or antipathy between them. And I'm not sure why. I think both sides, the very spiritual and the very scientific, would like to believe the other side is 100% wrong. And I think there's a real hubris on both sides that, I know the answer. And I've been on the scientific side for much of my life. And certainly there is that scientific hubris that, well, of course, none of this stuff can exist. There is always the scientific answer for everything, but that's not the way science really works. Science is an estimation. It's an estimation of what truth might be, but I'm not sure we ever ascribe to, knowing absolute truth. We just get as close as we can. And then that affords us a certain predictability in how we manage ourselves in this crazy world. But, is science ever going to prove or disprove ghosts? Is it ever going to disprove a God? Is it ever going to disprove an afterlife? I can't imagine. When you get deep into astrophysics, I think there's just as much leaps of faith there as there often is in religion. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. And I think it's fun to look at and play with that interaction between the two.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting debate. And I always find it interesting to remind people that, who's it? Gregory Mendel was a monk, and he was credited for inventing the scientific method. I'm sure there were variations on it before, but then again, the church has had its issues with people like Galileo. So,
yeah, again, I always worry when somebody is absolutely certain about anything, and I just think the more I know, the more I realize they don't know.
Well, I'm absolutely certain that this is going to be an interesting read for the listeners of Uncorking a Story.
I hope so.
And I do have some fun questions for you, because
Sure.
I always like to get to know my guests a little bit more. And one way I like to do that is through pop culture. So I'm curious, Doctor, when you were growing up, did you have any favorite TV shows, things that you like to watch on TV?
Well, I didn't see a lot of TV, but I was at the Gettysburg Address, and that was like one of my favorite. Yeah, no, if you start talking pop culture, we're in different generations, way separated.
That's quite all right.
Favorite TV shows. My parents were in World War II, and so anything that had to do with war was definitely high on the list. So there was Rat Patrol and Combat and a whole bunch of other military shows. And then I ascribe most of my personality and the way I deal with the world, interact with the world, to Bugs Bunny. And that is a certain level of irreverence and never taking things too seriously.
Sure. You mentioned, enjoying ghost stories before. Do you have a favorite ghost story, whether it's a book or a film that you really like?
One of my favorites is one of my mother's, and she was born and spent her early years in Scotland, and then they moved down to England really at the beginning of World War II. But they moved to a pub. My grandfather ran the pub, but it had rooms upstairs for rent, and my mother had one of the rooms there, and she started complaining to the family that somebody would come in the room and start moving furniture around, or moving her bed in the middle of the night, or lifting the end of the bed. And, they blew it off for a while, and she kept complaining about it until finally they started looking into it, and they were trying to figure, well, are there trains coming by or buses or something like that? They eventually called the previous owners of the pub, and they said, which room is she in? Room 23 or whatever it was. And he said, oh no, of course, room 20, everybody knows room 23 is haunted. And typical British fashion, my grandparents apparently were like, well, there's the answer. They didn't move her into another room or anything. They had the answer. It's just haunted.
I wish I could interview a ghost on this program. Because I just want to know the motivation behind just moving objects, and what do they get out of it? What is their what's the MO? Why?
Yeah, I part in the book, part of the supposition there was that ghosts may be trying to get to us somehow, and I reasoned that this surgeon, who's kind of right there at the dividing line of life and death, he's watched multiple people cross that line and pulled a few back. Maybe they would be, the ones most, I don't know, able to receive, if you will. Maybe it's not so easy to make that contact, and so if there are ghosts, maybe they would be reaching for people like that who may be familiar to them, might see them hanging around a little bit. So I don't know. I don't know, but that was one of the concepts I played with. And then, of course, the protagonist is saying, well, he believes they are ghosts. We're trying to decide whether he's crazy or not, but he believes they're ghosts, and therefore he's trying to figure out what the heck are they trying to reach out to me for.
You just mentioned something that I'm curious about, the dividing line between life and death. How fine, from your perspective as someone who's, done probably tens of thousands of surgeries, how fine is the line between life and death?
It's pretty fine. You were asking before, some of the reasons why I wrote the book, or why I would want, what messages I would want to come out of it. Another one is just how fragile this all is, how easy it is to cross that line depending on the circumstances. And therefore, I certainly hope that people come out of it cherishing what they have, cherishing the life that they have, cherishing the people they have around them, because it is so easy to cross that line. We will be in the middle of an operation sometimes and say, well, that's it. We know we're gone. On a medical legal level, it gets a little bit more drawn out and a little bit more legalistic. And so we have to prove on multiple levels. Obviously, it's easy if the heart stops, and stays stopped. But when we're going for brain death, it's much more of a process. And yet we usually are pretty darn certain right away.
Wow. That is that's somewhat chilling when you think about it. Because it's not like the brain isn't a system that just shuts down like a light switch. I mean, I'm guessing there's a process, whereas the heart can just stop. Does the brain, take a little while to fade away?
Well, if the insult is bad enough, you've only got a few minutes. The way the brain works, it takes a huge amount of energy, and there's reasons why, but it doesn't store energy in it. So it needs a constant supply of glucose, of sugar, and of oxygen to produce enough energy to keep your nerves firing. And you've only got a few minutes if that's completely shut off. You've only got a few minutes to keep to restore things, or everything shuts down and goes out. Now, most insults that we sustain, it's not the whole brain that's feeling it, unless indeed your heart stops. So if your heart stops, you've only got a few minutes to go before your brain is gone. But usually, like a stroke will hit one area of the brain, or that sort of thing. Now, sometimes the area that it hits can be very strategic. So we talk in the book, even we talk about your brain stem is kind of a series of on-off switches for the rest of the computer. The rest of the brain is the computer, is all the hardware and all that sort of thing. But the brain stem is the on-off switches. So if you have a stroke in your brain stem, for example, you may just shut off all the on-off switches. Then it doesn't matter if all the hard drive and all the programs are still there and are still potentially functionable. If you can't turn them on, you're dead.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about this because my mother is, currently she's 90, hasn't been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but man, her short-term memory is just not there. Like she came up here. I live in Connecticut. They live in Florida. And I have a twin brother, got married last weekend. She came up for the wedding. Couldn't remember why she was coming up here. Had a great time at the wedding. Following day, couldn't really remember being at the wedding. And it's hard. And but no diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Long-term memory seems fine. It's just like the short term, the past, I don't know, 8 or so years has just been declining and declining and declining. It's and I don't know. I don't know what to think about it.
Yeah, we all lose memory. We all lose neurons. connections as the years go on, for sure. When you get to that age range, it does accelerate even under normal circumstances. But then there are diseases such as Alzheimer's that will accelerate it. And it has, what you're describing has an Alzheimer-y feel, if you will, with the short term really getting affected, but still still a fair amount of preservation of long term. Alzheimer's can stay kind of in an early stage for quite a few years. And the older you get, the more prone you are to Alzheimer's as well. So it's possible. It's certainly not unreasonable to have her evaluated for it, although a lot of times, it's mostly watching the clinical progression.
Yeah. And Alzheimer-y, a word I've never heard before, but
I just made it up. But
Shakespeare
was allowed to do it.
All right. Well, it all goes back to Billy Shakespeare.
Yep.
So we've been talking to Dr. Gary Simonds, the new Robin Cook, who I'm going to call him the new Robin Cook. First medical thriller I ever read was Robin Cook. My grandfather was a field surgeon in World War II.
Oh, wow.
And he had a bookshelf at their condominium, and I saw Robin Cook. I think it was Coma or Brain. I can't remember which one. And I remember being a young kid and just picking it up, and that's what got me hooked on Cook, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say, hooked on Cook. But
no, I thought his works were great. You were talking pop culture earlier. What were your early shows?
Man, one of my favorite shows as a kid, I have so many. I watched a lot of TV, but one that stands out that my brother and I would actually play was Emergency, which was about paramedics in LA County. And I just thought with the fire trucks and then just the action, the suspense. It was great. I love that show. And then I could talk about my love for the greatest American hero and Love Boat, but I'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, I was hoping you would at least ask me about music, because my generation had the best.
Well, there you go. And then name some of your faves.
Well, the Stones, of course, and Led Zeppelin probably got me through many decades. And I still listen to him. And as long as Keith is around, I know there is, righteousness in this world.
Keith does not live far from my twin brother, who I mentioned earlier, who got married. Does not live far from my brother Jimmy. So right, he's a local Connecticut guy.
Wow,
or at least he has a house here.
He had a neurosurgical procedure himself several years ago. He had fallen from a tree or something.
Yes, fallen from a tree. Exactly right.
Had to have a clot evacuated.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he's still alive is amazing, right? We lose Glenn Fry, but Keith Richards is still kicking.
Better living through chemistry was always our response.
I like the Stones. I was more of a Who guy. I think there could be some kind of artificial separation between the two. My friend group, you were one or the other, and I was more on the Who side of things. But I was listening to the radio the other day, and they played 19th Nervous Breakdown, and I think they said the song came out in 1966. And I'm thinking, the Stones have been around since 1962.
Yeah.
Which is so hard to even fathom. It's so hard to even fathom, but I'm like, wow, these guys have been around for a long time.
Yeah, I think Mick is the same age as our president, or somewhere around there. And the Who was great. There's no question about it. Also, Pink Floyd is another great one from.
Of course, David Gilmour. His tone is unrivaled. Absolutely. I can't think of anybody who's got a tone like that. It's such a great signature on him. Well, we've talked about it all. We've talked about death. We've talked about life. We've talked about Alzheimer-y things and music, and of course, books. And Death's Pale Flag is available, I imagine, wherever books are sold.
Yeah, it comes out on June 27th, and we'll hopefully garner some interest. Let's put it that way.
There you go. So, Dr. Simonds, do you have a website or social media handles you want to share with everybody?
Sure. The easiest one is I do have a website. It's just under my name, Gary R. Simonds, Simond. You got to remember the DS. .com. So that one's pretty easy, GaryRSimons.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and everything else I can imagine. Usually pretty close to that as well, under Gary R. Simonds.
And I think a little birdie told me you have a TikTok account. Is that true?
I do. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I started populating. I'm making these mini videos. I teach a lot of med school and pre-meds at Virginia Tech, and the undergrads said what we're doing to the pre-meds. Probably going to write another nonfiction book at some point, saying are we burning out our doctors before they reach medical school? What we do to our pre-meds is just insane anymore. And so what I've tried to do, I'm making these short videos because everybody tells me their attention spans are so short, but I'm making these short videos just starting to talk about, medical school, how to get into medical school, how to improve your application, what life is like and stuff like that. So I've been starting to feed them into TikTok. We'll see how that goes.
There you go. All right. Well, Dr. Simonds, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Oh, it's really a pleasure. I'm honored that you did this for me.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.